Relax with stories that help you sleep, work, and calm your mind. Today's story is called The Single Neighbor. We invite you to listen and support our channel by clicking subscribe and receiving channel notifications to conveniently follow the next videos. Sincerely, thank you. The Los Angeles evening unfurled like a slow, sultry melody, the sky bruising into hues of tangerine and violet. Silver Lake, a haven for the city's dreamers, pulsed with a quiet electricity, streets lined with mural-splashed walls, coffee shops buzzing with poets, and bars where musicians spilled their souls into microphones. Nestled in this creative crucible was the Atelier, a 5-story apartment building that wore its age like a badge of honor. Its red brick exterior, weathered by decades of sun and rain, was softened by tendrils of ivy that clung like lovers' fingers. The windows, mismatched and framed in peeling paint, glowed with the lives inside artists, writers, filmmakers, all chasing something bigger than themselves. The air in the hallways carried the faint perfume of turpentine, incense, and the dreams of those who dared to create. Mason Brooks, 31, stood in the heart of his one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor, a sanctuary of controlled chaos. The space was a reflection of his mind-cluttered yet deliberate, with stacks of film scripts teetering on a coffee table, vinyl records leaning against a bookshelf, and a vintage camera perched on a tripod by the window. A single-floor lamp cast a golden pool of light, illuminating the worn leather armchair where Mason spent his evenings. At 6'1", he had a presence that filled the room without trying, broad shoulders that strained slightly against his black cotton t-shirt, a lean torso that hinted at disciplined strength, and long legs clad in faded jeans that hugged his thighs just enough to draw the eye. His dark brown hair, perpetually tousled as if he'd just run his hands through it, fell in soft waves over his forehead, brushing the tops of his hazel eyes. Those eyes were a storm of green and gold, sharp with the focus of a man who saw the world through a lens, yet softened by a quiet vulnerability. A faint stubble shadowed his jaw, accentuating the hard line of his cheekbones and the subtle dimple that appeared when he smirked at a smile that could disarm or devastate, depending on his mood. His hands, strong and slightly calloused from years of gripping cameras and scribbling notes, moved with a grace that belied their roughness, now cradling a glass of bourbon as he crossed to his turntable. It was 8:32 p.m., and the needle dropped onto a Miles Davis record, releasing the first mournful notes of autumn leaves. The trumpet's wail curled through the air like smoke, wrapping around Mason's thoughts as he sank into his chair. The bourbon burned a slow path down his throat, its warmth a counterpoint to the ache in his chest. 6 months ago, his girlfriend Claire had walked out, her parting words cutting deeper than he'd admitted. "You're married to your films, Mason. I was just a guest star." He hadn't fought for her to stay. Maybe she was right, his heart belonged to the stories he told, the frames he captured. But tonight, the jazz felt different, less like a shield and more like a confession. He leaned his head back, the muscles in his neck flexing subtly, and closed his eyes, letting the music pull him somewhere softer, somewhere less lonely. Next door, in the apartment that had stood empty for months, Emery Reyes, 29, was carving out a new chapter. She'd arrived in Los Angeles 4 days ago, a freelance writer with a suitcase full of notebooks and a heart full of unwritten stories. Her apartment mirrored Mason's in layout but was distinctly hers, a canvas of possibility. Books spilled across the floor in haphazard stacks, their spines creased from late-night readings. A typewriter sat on a wobbly desk, its keys gleaming under the glow of fairy lights strung across the ceiling like a constellation. A half-unpacked box of clothes lay in the corner, spilling silk scarves and soft cottons. Emery herself was a vision, the kind of beauty that didn't demand attention, but commanded it effortlessly. At 5'6", her frame was a study, in contrast slithe, yet curvaceous, with hips that swayed like a metronome when she walked, each step a quiet promise. Her skin, a warm olive, shimmered faintly under the light, smooth and unblemished, inviting the imagination to linger. Her raven black hair, thick and lustrous, cascaded in loose waves down her back, grazing the waistband of her high-waisted jeans, which hugged the gentle flare of her hips and the long, toned lines of her legs. Her sleeveless cream blouse, slightly sheer, clung to the delicate curve of her collarbone and the soft swell of her breasts, the fabric shifting with each breath. Her eyes, a deep almond brown, were framed by lashes so long they cast shadows on her cheeks, and they held a spark of wit, a flicker of mystery, as if she knew something the world hadn't yet figured out. Her lips, full and naturally rosy, curved into a half-smile that could unravel a stranger's defenses. Her hands, slender with tapered fingers, bore faint ink stains, a testament to her craft, and her nails, painted a deep burgundy, caught the light as she moved. Emery's evenings were sacred, a time when the world faded and her words took flight. She sat at her desk, her bare feet tucked beneath her, the arch of her soles graceful, even in repose. Her neck, long and elegant, tilted slightly as she typed, each keystroke a rhythm that matched her pulse. But tonight, as she paused to stretch, her arms lifting overhead to reveal the taut line of her waist, she heard a faint, soulful strain of jazz seeping through the wall. Autumn leaves, her breath hitched, her lips parting in a soft gasp. The melody was a time machine, pulling her back to her college years in Seattle, when she'd lie on her dorm room floor, a glass of cheap wine in hand, dreaming of a life where she could write without fear. She closed her eyes, her lashes brushing her cheeks, and let the music wash over her, each note a caress against her skin. Her fingers, still hovering over the typewriter, twitched as if they wanted to capture the feeling in words. Rising, Emery padded across the hardwood floor, her bare feet silent, her toes curling slightly against the cool wood. She pressed her palm against the wall, the plaster cool beneath her touch, and imagined the person on the other side. Was it a man? A woman? Someone old, steeped in nostalgia, or young, chasing the same restless dreams she did? Her lips curved into a smile, slow and secretive, as she pictured them, whoever they were, swaying to the same rhythm that stirred her soul. The music swelled, the saxophone's low hum vibrating through her fingertips, and she felt a pull, a connection to a stranger she hadn't yet met. Mason, unaware of the audience his music had found, stood and stretched, his shirt riding up to reveal a sliver of toned abdomen, the faint trail of dark hair disappearing into his jeans. His movements were unhurried, almost feline, as he crossed to the window, his silhouette sharp against the glass. The city lights glittered below, a mosaic of stories waiting to be told. He sipped his bourbon, the glass cool against his lips, and wondered, not for the first time, if he'd ever find someone who understood the way he saw the world, not just through a camera, but through the quiet moments, the ones that lingered like the last note of a song. Emery, seized by a sudden impulse, tore a scrap of paper from her notebook. Her handwriting, a graceful scrawl, danced across the page as she wrote, "Ban autumn leaves dim, ne depte." She hesitated, her fingers brushing the paper's edge, her heart fluttering with a mix of daring and doubt. Then, slipping on a pair of leather sandals that showed off the delicate curve of her ankles, she stepped into the hallway. The corridor was dim, lit only by flickering sconces, and smelled faintly of lavender from a neighbor's diffuser. Kneeling, her hair falling over one shoulder like a dark curtain, she slid the note under the door of apartment 4B, her breath catching as the paper disappeared. She didn't wait for a response, retreating to her apartment with a grin that felt like a stolen kiss. Mason heard the faint rustle, but chalked it up to the building's cork-soled pipes, creaking floors. It wasn't until he refilled his glass, the bourbon glinting in the lamplight, that he noticed the slip of paper on the floor, its edges curling like a secret waiting to be unfolded. He crouched, his jeans pulling taut across his thighs, and picked it up, his brows knitting as he read the words. His lips parted, then curved into a slow, lopsided grin, that dimple flashing like a hidden treasure. Who the hell? He turned toward the wall, as if he could see through it to the person who'd left this gift. His fingers traced the note's edge, the paper soft against his skin, and he felt a spark, a flicker of something he hadn't felt since before Claire, before the loneliness had settled in like dust. Emery, back in her apartment, leaned against her door, her chest rising and falling with a quiet laugh. Her blouse slipped slightly, revealing the smooth curve of her shoulder, and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers lingering against her neck. She didn't know his name, didn't know his face, but she knew his music, and it was enough to make her feel seen, even if just for a moment. Kicking off her sandals, she returned to her typewriter, but her thoughts were no longer on her story. They were on the stranger next door, the one whose music had slipped through the walls and into her veins. Mason tucked the note into his pocket, a talisman of possibility. He sank back into his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, and sipped his bourbon, the glass cool against his palm. The jazz played on, each note a thread weaving through the silence, connecting two apartments, two lives, two hearts that didn't yet know they were already on a collision course. Outside, Los Angeles hummed, alive with the promise of beginnings, and in the space between their walls, the music lingered, a quiet invitation to whatever came next. The Los Angeles morning dawned with a hazy glow, the sun filtering through a veil of smog and promise. Silver Lake stirred slowly, its streets alive with the clatter of coffee shops, the hum of bicycles, and the distant strum of a busker's guitar. The atelier, with its ivy-clad brick and weathered charm, stood as a quiet sentinel amidst the bustle, its residents weaving their dreams into the city's tapestry. Inside, the hallways smelled of fresh paint and old stories, the kind that lingered in the creaks of the floorboards and the flicker of outdated sconces. Emery Reyes, 29, stood in her apartment, surrounded by the gentle chaos of her new life. The Space Was Coming Together books now lined the shelves, their spines a patchwork of colors, while her typewriter sat proudly on its desk, bathed in the soft glow of fairy lights. She wore a fitted olive green tank top that hugged the curve of her waist and the gentle swell of her chest, paired with high-waisted denim shorts that showcased her long, toned legs. Her olive skin shimmered faintly in the morning light, a canvas of warmth and invitation. Her raven black hair was swept into a loose bun, a few tendrils escaping to frame her face, brushing against her high cheekbones. Her almond brown eyes, framed by lashes that seemed to carry their own gravity, sparkled with a mix of determination and mischief as she surveyed the cardboard box at her feet. It was heavy, stuffed with manuscripts and vintage journals, and she was determined to haul it to the storage closet downstairs. Her lips, full and kissed with a natural flush, curved into a half smile as she bent to lift it, her hips swaying slightly, her movements fluid and unself-conscious. Her slender hands, nails still painted that deep burgundy, gripped the box, and she let out a soft huff, her breath stirring the air. Mason Brooks, 31, was in his apartment next door, nursing a cup of black coffee as he scrolled through emails on his laptop. His space was a familiar mess script scattered across the table, a storyboard pinned to the wall, and his turntable silent for now, waiting for the evening's ritual. At 6'1", Mason's presence was magnetic, his broad shoulders filling out a charcoal Henley that clung to the lean muscles of his chest and arms. His faded jeans hung low on his hips, hinting at the strength in his thighs and the subtle V of his abdomen. His dark brown hair, tousled as always, fell into his hazel eyes, which flickered with a restless energy, a mix of focus and yearning. The stubble on his jaw was a touch darker today, framing the hard line of his cheekbones and that fleeting dimple that appeared when he grinned. His hands, strong and slightly rough from years of handling cameras, wrapped around his coffee mug, the warmth seeping into his palms. He was still thinking about the note from 3 nights ago, Ban, Autumn Leaves Dem, Ne Depte. It was tucked into the pocket of his jacket, a quiet mystery that had sparked something in him, a curiosity that felt like the first frame of a new film. Emery, box in arms, made her way to the hallway, her sandals slapping softly against the hardwood. The elevator, notoriously temperamental, was out of service again, its doors taped shut with a handwritten sign, broken, use stairs. Sorry. She sighed, her lips pursing in frustration, and shifted the box's weight, her biceps flexing subtly under her smooth skin. The stairwell was her only option, and she descended carefully, her hair bouncing with each step, her breath steady but labored. By the 3rd floor, the box felt like a boulder, and by the 2nd, her arms were trembling, her fingers slipping. She paused on the landing, setting the box down with a thud, and leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling, the tank top clinging to her skin where a faint sheen of sweat had formed. She tilted her head back, her neck arching gracefully, and muttered, "This city's gonna kill me before I even unpack." Mason, meanwhile, had decided to grab his mail from the lobby. He stepped into the hallway, his boots scuffing the floor, and locked his door, the keychain jangling in his hand. As he approached the stairwell, he heard a soft, cursy woman's voice, low and laced with exasperation. His lips twitched, and he pushed open the door, his eyes landing on Emery before he fully registered the scene. She was a vision, even in her disheveled state, her hair slightly askew, her skin glowing with effort, her body a study in strength and softness. The box at her feet was clearly the culprit, its corners dented from the journey. Mason's gaze lingered, taking in the curve of her shoulders, the way her shorts hugged her hips, the delicate line of her collarbone exposed by the tank top. His heart gave a quick, unexpected thud. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice a warm baritone, rough around the edges like his stubble. Emery's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, the world narrowed to that single point of contact. His hazel eyes were a storm of green and gold, sharp yet kind, and she felt a jolt like she'd touched a live wire. She straightened, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her lips curving into a smile that was equal parts relief and intrigue. "Depends," she said, her voice smooth with a hint of a tease. "You offering out of chivalry or pity?" Mason chuckled, the sound low and rich, and stepped closer, his boots echoing in the stairwell. "Chivalry, mostly. Pity's a bad look on me." He crouched beside the box, his jeans pulling taut across his thighs, and tested its weight, his biceps flexing under his sleeves. "Damn, what's in here? Bricks?" "Books," Emery replied, crossing her arms, which only accentuated the curve of her chest. "The heavy kind. Stories don't come cheap." He grinned, that dimple flashing, and hoisted the box with ease, his shoulders rolling under the weight. "Lead the way, then. Where's this beast going?" "Storage closet, lobby level," she said, falling into step beside him as they descended. Her sandals clicked softly, and she stole glances at him, noting the way his hair caught the light, the faint scent of cedar and coffee that clung to him. He was handsome in a way that felt effortless, not polished but raw, like a character from one of her stories come to life. Her pulse quickened, and she wondered if he was the one behind the jazz, the one who'd received her note. The stairwell was narrow, forcing them close, their arms brushing occasionally as they navigated the steps. Each touch was a spark, brief but electric, and Emery felt her skin hum where his sleeve grazed her elbow. Mason, too, was hyper-aware of the warmth of her presence, the subtle sway of her hips, the way her eyes seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken stories. By the time they reached the lobby, the box was in the storage closet, and both were slightly breathless, not from the effort, but from the weight of something new. "Thanks," Emery said, leaning against the closet door, her posture relaxed but deliberate, one hip cocked slightly. "You're a lifesaver?" "Mason," he supplied, extending a hand. "Mason Brooks." Her hand slipped into his, her grip firm but soft, her skin cool against his warmth. "Emery Reyes," she said, her eyes locking onto his, a slow smile spreading across her lips. "So, Mason, you're the guy with the killer jazz collection, huh?" His brows lifted, and his grin widened, that dimple deepening. "Caught me. You're the one leaving notes under my door, then?" "Autumn leaves fan?" She laughed, the sound bright and unguarded, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers lingering against her neck. "Guilty. It's my weakness. That, and neighbors who play it like they mean it." Mason's eyes flicked over her, taking in the way her tank top clung to her curves, the confidence in her stance, the spark in her gaze. "Well, Emery," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "you've got good taste. And good timing. I was just thinking I needed a new audience." The air between them thickened, charged with possibility. They stood in the lobby, the world outside buzzing faintly, but here it was just them two strangers who felt anything but. Emery tilted her head, her lips parting as if to say something, then thought better of it. Instead, she asked, "So, what's on the playlist tonight?" Mason leaned against the wall, his posture mirroring hers, his eyes never leaving her face. "Depends. What's your vibe? Something slow and soulful, or something with a little more heat?" Her smile turned sly, her eyes glinting with challenge. "Surprise me, but I'm warning you, I'm picky." "Noted," he said, his voice a low rumble. How about this come by tonight? Bring your pickiest self. I'll spin something good. Maybe throw in a glass of wine. You in? Emery's heart skipped, but she played it cool, her fingers brushing the edge of her shorts. Tempting, but I've got one condition. Name it, he said, stepping closer, his boots scuffing the floor, his scent wrapping around her. Dim lights, she said, her voice soft but deliberate, each word a brush stroke. Good music deserves a mood. Mason's grin was slow, almost predatory, but his eyes were warm, searching. Deal. 8 p.m. apartment. 4B. Don't be late. Emery Reyes. She stepped back, her hips swaying, as she turned toward the stairs, tossing a look over her shoulder. Wouldn't dream of it, Mason Brooks. As she climbed the steps, her pulse raced, her skin tingling with the memory of his gaze. Mason watched her go, his coffee forgotten, the box a distant memory. The note in his pocket felt heavier now, like a promise. Tonight, the music would play again. But this time, it wouldn't be just through the walls. It would be a conversation, a dance, a beginning. The Los Angeles night draped itself over Silver Lake like a lover's whisper, the city lights twinkling below a sky bruised with indigo. The atelier stood quietly, its brick facade glowing faintly under the street lamps, a haven for the restless and the inspired. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of possibility candle wax, aged wood, and the faint tang of anticipation. Mason Brooks' apartment, number 4B, had transformed into a stage for something unspoken, something inevitable. The space was bathed in the warm glow of a dozen tea lights, their flames dancing across the walls, casting shadows that flickered like secrets. The leather armchair was pushed aside, making room for a small wooden table set with 2 wine glasses, a bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet, and a plate of figs and brie, their colors rich against the table's worn grain. The turntable, Mason's sacred altar, sat in the corner, its needle poised above a vinyl of Nina Simone, ready to weave its magic. The room felt alive, humming with the promise of a night that could change everything. Mason, 31, stood by the window, adjusting the dimmer switch until the light settled into a soft, golden haze. At 6'1", his frame was a study in quiet, power-broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of his navy button-down. The sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and dusted with dark hair. His faded jeans hung low, hugging the lean lines of his hips and thighs, hinting at the strength beneath. His dark brown hair, tousled as if he'd just run his fingers through it, fell into his hazel eyes, which burned with a mix of nerves and excitement, their green-gold depths catching the candlelight. The stubble on his jaw was neatly trimmed tonight, framing the hard angle of his cheekbones and that elusive dimple that flickered when he smiled. His hands, strong and calloused from years of wielding cameras, moved with a deliberate grace as he poured wine into the glasses, the liquid catching the light like a ruby. He was no stranger to women, to nights like this, but something about tonight about her felt different. The note from Emery, still tucked in his jacket pocket, was a talisman, a reminder of the music that had brought them here. He glanced at the clock, 7:58 p.m. His heart gave a quick, unsteady thud. Next door, Emery Reyes, 29, stood before her mirror, her reflection a vision that could stop time. She'd chosen a sleeveless black dress, its fabric clinging to her like a second skin, accentuating the curve of her waist, the gentle swell of her breasts and the flare of her hips. The hem grazed her mid-thighs, revealing legs that were long and toned, their olive skin shimmering under the fairy lights strung across her ceiling. Her raven black hair cascaded in loose waves, brushing her bare shoulders, each strand catching the light like silk. Her almond brown eyes, framed by lashes that seemed to whisper secrets, sparkled with anticipation, a hint of nervousness flickering in their depths. Her lips, full and painted a soft berry red, curved into a smile as she adjusted the thin gold necklace at her collarbone, its pendant resting just above the neckline of her dress. Her hands, slender and stained faintly with ink, smoothed the fabric over her hips, her burgundy-painted nails a quiet rebellion against the elegance of her outfit. She slipped on low-heeled ankle boots, their leather soft against the delicate arches of her feet, and took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling, the dress shifting to reveal the smooth line of her décolletage. She was no stranger to desire, to the pull of a moment, but this Mason, the jazz, the note felt like a story she hadn't written yet, one she was eager to unfold. At 8:01 p.m., Emery knocked on Mason's door, her knuckles rapping softly, her pulse a quiet drumbeat in her ears. The door opened, and there he was, his presence filling the frame, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're late," he said, his voice a low, teasing rumble, that dimple flashing as his lips curved into a grin. "Fashionably," she countered, stepping inside, her boots clicking against the hardwood, her scent jasmine and a hint of citrus trailed her, mingling with the candle wax and wine. She took in the room, her eyes lingering on the tea lights, the turntable, the intimacy of it all. "Nice setup, Brooks. You do this for all your neighbors?" "Only the ones who leave notes," he said, closing the door behind her, his movements unhurried, his gaze never leaving her. He gestured to the table. "Wine? Please," she said, settling onto the couch, her dress riding up slightly to reveal the smooth curve of her thigh. She crossed her legs, the motion deliberate, her eyes meeting his with a spark of challenge. Mason poured the wine, his fingers steady, but his pulse not, and handed her a glass, their fingertips brushing in a fleeting, electric touch. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, the faint scent of cedar and soap that clung to him. "To new audiences," he said, raising his glass, his voice soft but weighted with meaning. "To good music," she replied, clinking her glass against his, her lips parting as she sipped, the wine's warmth spreading through her. The first notes of Nina Simone's "Feeling Good" spilled from the turntable, the song's sultry cadence wrapping around them like a lover's arms. Emery leaned back, her hair spilling over the couch, her neck arching slightly as she closed her eyes, letting the music sink into her skin. "You weren't kidding about the playlist," she murmured, her voice a velvet purr. Mason watched her, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw, the way her lips glistened with wine, the soft rise and fall of her chest. She was breathtaking, not just in her beauty but in the way she inhabited the moment, unafraid to feel, to be seen. "Told you I'd deliver," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You're tough to impress, Reyes." She opened her eyes, her gaze locking onto his, a slow smile spreading across her lips. "Not that tough," she said, setting her glass down, her fingers brushing the table, her body shifting closer. "Just takes the right song." The air between them thickened, charged with a current that hummed beneath the music. They talked, their voices weaving through the melody, each word a step closer to something unguarded. Mason spoke of his films, the stories he chased, the way a single frame could capture a lifetime. His hands moved as he spoke, expressive, the candlelight catching the faint scars on his knuckles, a map of a life lived with passion. Emery listened, her eyes bright, her body angled toward him, her knee brushing his thigh. She shared her own story nights, spent writing until dawn, the novels she'd abandoned, the ache of relationships that had burned bright but left her cold. Her voice was soft but steady, her words painting images that lingered in the air, her hands gesturing gracefully, her fingers catching the light. They were strangers, yet not. The music, the wine, the dim light stripped away the barriers, leaving only truth. Mason's breakup with Claire came up, his voice tightening as he admitted how it had hollowed him out. She said, "I loved my work more than her," he said, his eyes dropping to his glass, his fingers tightening around the stem. Maybe she was right. Emery tilted her head, her hair falling over one shoulder, her eyes soft but piercing. Or maybe she didn't know how to love someone who sees the world the way you do, she said, her voice a gentle challenge, her hand resting on the couch, inches from his. He looked at her, his breath catching, her words landing like a key in a lock. "And you?" he asked, his voice rougher now, his eyes searching hers. "What's your story, Emery? Who broke your heart?" She laughed, the sound low and bittersweet, and sipped her wine, her lips leaving a faint stain on the glass. "A few tried," she said, her eyes flickering with a shadow of old wounds. "But I'm picky, remember? Takes more than a pretty face to keep me." Mason leaned closer, his elbow resting on the couch, his body angled toward hers, the space between them shrinking. "Good thing I've got music then," he said, his voice a low growl, his eyes glinting with mischief. She matched his lean, her knee brushing his again, the contact sending a shiver through her. "Good thing," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper, her lips curving into a smile that promised trouble. The song shifted to "My Baby Just Cares for Me," its playful rhythm a counterpoint to the tension building between them. They fell silent, the music filling the space, their eyes locked in a dance of their own. Mason's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, his breath uneven. Emery felt it too, the pull, the heat, the way her skin hummed under his scrutiny. She set her glass down, her movements slow, deliberate, her fingers brushing his as she reached for a fig on the table. The touch was accidental, but not, lingering just long enough to spark a fire. Their hands stayed close, fingers grazing, the air crackling with unspoken want. Mason's thumb brushed the back of her hand, a tentative exploration, and Emery's breath hitched, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. When she opened them, he was closer, his face inches from hers, his scent enveloping her cedar, wine, and something uniquely him. "Emery," he said, his voice a rough whisper, "if this is too much." "It's not," she cut in, her voice steady, her eyes burning into his. Not even close. The space between them vanished. His hand slid to her wrist, his fingers wrapping gently around it, feeling the pulse that raced beneath her skin. Her hand found his chest, her palm pressing against the firm muscle beneath his shirt, the heat of him seeping into her. The music swelled, Nina's voice a sultry guide, and they leaned in, their breaths mingling, their lips hovering a heartbeat apart. The first touch was soft, tentative, a question asked in silence. Then it deepened, a slow, hungry exploration, her lips parting under his hand sliding to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. She tasted of wine and desire, he of bourbon and restraint, and the kiss was a conversation urgent, unguarded, electric. They pulled back, breathless, their foreheads resting together, their eyes locked in a shared confession. "Damn," Mason murmured, his voice raw, his thumb brushing her cheek, tracing the curve of her jaw. "Yeah," Emery whispered, her lips swollen, her chest heaving, her hand still on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. Damn. The night stretched before them, a canvas of music and candlelight, and they knew, without saying it, that this was only the beginning. The Los Angeles night pressed against the windows of the atelier, a velvet curtain of stars and city lights that seemed to hold its breath. Inside Mason Brooks's apartment, the world had shrunk to the flicker of tea lights, the low hum of jazz, and the electric space between two bodies drawn inexorably together. The air was heavy with the scent of melted wax, red wine, and the unspoken desires that hung like smoke. The turntable spun a Billie Holiday record, her voice a sultry lament that wove through the room, each note a thread pulling Mason and Emery closer. The leather armchair, the scattered scripts, the half-eaten plate of fig salt faded into the background, irrelevant compared to the gravity of the moment. This was no longer just a night, a conversation, a flirtation. It was a collision, a surrender, a discovery of something neither had dared to hope for. Mason, 31, sat on the couch, his body angled toward Emery, his presence a quiet storm. At 6'1", he was all lean strength and effortless allure, his navy button-down open at the collar, revealing the taut line of his throat and the faint shadow of dark hair at the base of his chest. The sleeves, rolled to his elbows, exposed forearms corded with muscle, their skin marked by faint scars from years of hauling camera equipment and chasing stories. His faded jeans clung to his hips and thighs, hinting at the power in his frame, the kind that suggested he could carry the weight of the worlder, a woman without faltering. His dark brown hair, perpetually tousled, fell into his hazel eyes, their green-gold depths burning with a mix of hunger and restraint, catching the candlelight like a forest under a setting sun. The stubble on his jaw was a rugged contrast to the softness of his lips, which parted slightly as he watched her, that elusive dimple flickering when he let himself smile. His hands, strong and calloused, rested on his thighs, fingers flexing as if resisting the urge to reach for her, to close the distance that felt both infinite and non-existent. Emery, 29, was a vision across from him, her body a symphony of curves and grace on the couch. Her black dress hugged her like a lover's touch, its fabric molding to the gentle swell of her breasts, the dip of her waist, and the flare of her hips, ending just above her mid-thighs to reveal legs that were long, toned, and impossibly smooth, their olive skin glowing in the dim light. Her raven black hair spilled over her shoulders in loose waves, brushing the bare skin of her arms, each strand catching the flicker of the tea lights like liquid obsidian. Her almond brown eyes, framed by lashes that seemed to carry the weight of secrets, locked onto his with an intensity that made the air hum, their depths sparkling with desire and a hint of vulnerability. Her lips, full and stained with berry red lipstick, glistened as she sipped her wine, leaving a faint mark on the glass that Mason couldn't stop staring at. Her slender hands, nails painted a deep burgundy, moved with a dancer's grace, one resting on the couch, the other tracing the rim of her glass, her fingers leaving a trail of warmth against the crystal. Her neck, long and elegant, arched slightly as she leaned forward, the thin gold necklace at her collarbone glinting, its pendant nestled just above the neckline of her dress, drawing the eye to the soft curve of her décolletage. She was magnetic, not just in her beauty, but in the way she carried herself, confident yet unguarded. A woman who knew what she wanted, but wasn't afraid to feel the weight of it. The kiss they'd shared moments ago lingered like a live wire, its heat still pulsing in their veins. Billie Holiday's "Lover Man" filled the room, its slow, aching melody a mirror to the tension between them. They hadn't spoken since their lips parted, their foreheads pressed together, their breaths mingling in the aftermath. The silence was loud, heavy with what came next, what neither could deny. Emery's hand still rested on Mason's chest, her palm feeling the rapid thud of his heart beneath the cotton of his shirt, the heat of him seeping into her skin. His hand had found her wrist, his fingers wrapped gently around it, his thumb brushing the delicate pulse point where her blood raced, a silent conversation of want and permission. Her dress had ridden up slightly, revealing the smooth expanse of her thigh, and Mason's eyes flicked there, then back to her face, his gaze a question, a plea, a promise. "Mason," she whispered, her voice a velvet caress, barely audible over the music but loud enough to shake the world. Her eyes searched his, her lips parting, the berry red stains smudged from their kiss, making them look softer, more inviting. She leaned closer, her hair falling over one shoulder, brushing his arm, the contact sending a shiver through him. "Emery," he murmured, his voice rough, raw with the effort of holding back. His hand slid from her wrist to her forearm, his fingers tracing the smooth skin, feeling the faint tremor beneath. "Tell me to stop, and I will." She shook her head, a small, deliberate motion, her eyes never leaving his. "Don't," she said, her voice steady, laced with a hunger that matched his. "Don't stop." The words were a spark to kindling. Mason's hand moved to her cheek, his palm cupping her face, his thumb brushing the curve of her lower lip, feeling its softness, its warmth. Emery's breath hitched, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment, her lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. She leaned into his touch, her body shifting closer, her knee brushing his thigh, the contact igniting a fire that spread through them both. Their lips met again, not tentative this time, but urgent, hungry, a collision of need and surrender. Her mouth opened under his, her tongue brushing his, a slow, deliberate dance that tasted of wine and longing. His hand slid to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, pulling gently, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. She moaned softly, the sound vibrating against his lips, and it undid him, unraveling the last of his restraint. Emery's hands found his shoulders, her fingers digging into the muscle, feeling the strength beneath his shirt, the heat of him radiating through the fabric. She pressed herself closer, her breasts brushing his chest, the friction sending a jolt through her nipples tightening under the thin fabric of her dress. Mason's other hand found her waist, his fingers splaying across the curve, pulling her toward him until she was nearly in his lap, her thighs straddling his, the dress riding up to reveal the smooth, golden skin of her hips. Her body was a revelation, soft where it should be, firm where it mattered, every curve an invitation to explore. His hand slid lower, tracing the line of her thigh, his fingers brushing the edge of her dress, teasing the skin just beneath, feeling the warmth, the softness, the promise of more. She broke the kiss, gasping, her lips swollen, her eyes dark with desire. "Mason," she breathed, her voice a plea, a command, her hands sliding down his chest, her fingers catching the buttons of his shirt, undoing them one by one with a deliberation that made his pulse race. His skin was revealed, inch by inch taut, tanned, dusted with dark hair, the muscles of his chest and abdomen flexing under her touch. She ran her hands over him, her nails grazing lightly, leaving trails of fire in their wake. He groaned, the sound low and primal, his head falling back, his throat exposed, the line of his Adam's apple sharp against the candlelight. "You're killing me," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper, his hands tightening on her hips, pulling her closer, feeling the heat of her core against him, the thin barrier of their clothes, a torment. She smiled, a slow, wicked curve of her lips, and leaned in, her mouth brushing his ear, her breath warm against his skin. "Good," she whispered, her voice a siren's call, her lips grazing his jaw, his neck, the pulse point where his blood thundered. Their bodies moved together, a slow, instinctive rhythm that matched the music, Billy's voice a guide through the haze of want. Mason's hands roamed, one sliding up her back, fingers tracing the zipper of her dress, the other cupping her thigh, lifting her slightly, positioning her against him in a way that made her gasp, her head falling back, her hair spilling like a dark waterfall. The dress slipped off one shoulder, revealing the smooth curve of her collarbone, the swell of her breast, the edge of a black lace bra that made his mouth go dry. He kissed her there, his lips soft but insistent, tasting the salt of her skin, feeling the shudder that ran through her. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, her nails scraping his scalp, her body arching into his touch. The room spun, the candles blurring into a golden haze, the music a heartbeat that drove them forward. They were no longer just Mason and Emery, neighbors bound by a note and a song. They were two souls stripped bare, seeking solace in each other's arms, healing wounds they hadn't named. There was no rush, no desperation, only a deep, deliberate need to know every inch of the other, to map the places where their bodies met, where their breaths intertwined. His shirt fell to the floor, her dress followed, pooling at her feet like a shadow, leaving her in black lace and skin that glowed like amber. His jeans joined the pile, his body revealed lean, strong, every muscle a testament to a life lived with purpose, his arousal evident, unashamed. They moved to the floor, the rug soft beneath them, the candles casting their shadows on the wall, a dance of light and darkness. Mason hovered above her, his arms braced on either side, his eyes searching hers, asking one last time. Emery answered with a nod, her hands pulling him down, her legs wrapping around his hips, guiding him to her. Their bodies joined, slow at first, then deeper, a rhythm that was both tender and fierce, each movement a confession, each gasp a vow. Her nails dug into his back, his lips found her throat, her breasts, her mouth, their breaths a shared song, their bodies a single note stretched across the night. It wasn't about possession, not about claiming. It was about giving, about finding the places where their broken edges fit, where their scars aligned. Emery's eyes stayed open, locked on his, her lips parting in silent cries, her body trembling as the pleasure built, a wave that crested and crashed, pulling him with her. Mason's voice was a low groan, his body shuddering, his arms tightening around her as they fell together. Spent, entwined, their breaths ragged, their hearts pounding in unison. They lay there, tangled in each other, the music still playing, Billy's voice a soft echo in the quiet. Mason's fingers traced lazy circles on Emery's back, her skin warm and damp, her hair fanned across his chest. She nestled closer, her cheek against his heart, her legs draped over his, her body soft and pliant in the afterglow. Neither spoke, not yet. Words felt too small for what had passed between them, for the way their bodies had spoken truths their hearts weren't ready to name. The candles burned low, the night stretching on, and in that moment, under the dim lights, they were and not woe strangers who had found each other, not by chance, but by the music that had always been playing, waiting for them to listen. The Los Angeles morning crept into the atelier like a shy guest, its light filtering through the gauzy curtains of Mason Brooks' apartment, casting soft, golden streaks across the hardwood floor. The city outside stirred with its usual rhythm-distant car horns, the chatter of early risers, the faint strum of a street musician, but inside, time seemed to pause, holding its breath in the quiet aftermath of the night before. The air was warm, scented with the remnants of melted candle wax, red wine, and the intimate musk of two bodies that had found each other in the dark. The turntable sat silent, its needle lifted, the Billie Holiday record now a quiet witness to the hours that had unfolded. Scattered clothes, a black dress, a navy button-down, a pair of jeans lay in a haphazard trail across the rug, telling a story of abandon and connection. The tea lights had burned out, leaving only their waxen ghosts, but the room still glowed with a residual warmth, as if the walls themselves remembered the heat of the night. Emery Reyes, 29, stirred first, her body cocooned in the soft weight of Mason's white dress shirt, its sleeves too long, the hem grazing her thighs. The fabric carried his scent-cedar, soap, and a trace of bourbon wrapping her, in a comfort that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. At 5'6", her frame was a delicate balance of strength and softness, her olive skin luminous in the morning light, smooth and unblemished, with a faint flush still lingering from the night's exertions. Her raven black hair, tousled from sleep and passion, spilled across the pillow in wild waves, framing her face like a dark halo. Her almond brown eyes, heavy with the haze of waking, blinked slowly, their lashes casting long shadows across her cheeks, their depths holding a mix of contentment and curiosity. Her lips, full and naturally rosy, bore the faintest trace of last night's berry red stain, now softened into a gentle curve as she took in her surroundings. Her slender hands, nails still painted a deep burgundy, clutched the shirt's collar, her fingers brushing the fabric as if grounding herself in the reality of where she was. Her legs, long and toned, stretched beneath the sheet, their curves a quiet invitation even in repose, the arch of her feet peeking out, delicate and unguarded. She lay in Mason's bed, the mattress dipping slightly under her weight, the sheets tangled around her hips, hinting at the intimacy that had unfolded hours ago. Mason, 31, was still asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even, his body a landscape of lean muscle and quiet strength. At 6'1", he filled the bed with an effortless presence, his broad shoulders relaxed against the pillow, his chest rising and falling, dusted with dark hair that trailed down his toned abdomen, disappearing beneath the sheet, that draped low on his hips. His dark brown hair, perpetually tousled, fell across his forehead, softening the sharp lines of his face-high cheekbones, a jaw shadowed with stubble, and that elusive dimple hidden in sleep. His hazel eyes, now closed, had burned with intensity last night, their green-gold depths a mirror to his desire, his vulnerability. His arms, corded with muscle and marked by faint scars from years of hauling camera equipment, lay loosely at his sides, one hand resting near Emery's thigh, as if even in sleep he sought her. His lips, slightly parted, were soft in repose, a contrast to the hunger they'd shown hours ago, and his skin, tanned and warm, glowed faintly in the morning light, inviting touch, memory, exploration. Emery shifted, propping herself on one elbow, her hair falling over her shoulder as she studied him. The shirt slipped slightly, revealing the curve of her collarbone, the gentle swell of her breast, the skin still marked faintly by the press of his lips. She felt a warmth in her chest, not just from the night's passion, but from something deeper, something that scared her as much as it thrilled her. Last night had been more than bodies. Meat in it had been souls brushing, edges aligning, wounds whispering to each other in the dark. She reached out, her fingers hovering over his chest, then traced a slow line down his sternum, feeling the steady thud of his heart, the warmth of his skin. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence thick with unspoken questions, shared secrets, and the weight of what they'd done. "Morning," Mason murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, rough with sleep, and something softer, something that felt like care. His hazel eyes locked onto hers, their depths warm, searching, a smile tugging at his lips, that dimple flickering like a promise. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, his thumb brushing the back of her knuckles, the touch grounding, electric. "Morning," Emery replied, her voice soft, a velvet caress, her lips curving into a smile that was equal parts shy and bold. She sat up slightly, the shirt shifting to reveal more of her thigh, the smooth golden skin catching the light. "You look surprisingly good for someone who stayed up half the night." He chuckled, the sound warm and unguarded, and propped himself on one elbow, mirroring her pose, the sheet slipping lower to reveal the taut line of his abdomen, the faint trail of hair that made her pulse quicken. "Says the woman wearing my shirt like she owns it," he teased, his eyes roaming over her, taking in the way the fabric clung to her curves, the tousled beauty of her hair, the spark in her eyes. "You're making it hard to focus, Reyes." "Good," she said, her smile turning sly, her eyes glinting with mischief. She leaned closer, her hair brushing his arm, the contact sending a shiver through them both. Focus is overrated. The air between them hummed, charged with the same electricity that had sparked last night, but softer now, tempered by the morning's quiet. Mason's hand moved to her cheek, his palm cupping her face, his thumb brushing the curve of her lower lip, feeling its softness, its warmth. Emery's breath hitched, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment, her lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. She leaned into his touch, her body shifting closer, her knee brushing his beneath the sheet, the contact a reminder of how easily they fit together. They didn't kiss, not yet, but the promise of it hung between them, a thread waiting to be pulled. "You hungry?" Mason asked, his voice low, his hand sliding to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling gently in her hair. "I make a mean cup of coffee. And I've got eggs, maybe, or toast." Don't expect a Michelin star." Emery laughed, the sound bright and unguarded, and opened her eyes, her gaze locking onto his. "Coffee sounds perfect," she said, her voice warm, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. "But I'm warning you, I'm picky about my brew." "Noted," he said, his grin widening, that dimple deepening. He sat up, the sheet falling away, revealing more of his body, lean, strong, every muscle, a testament to a life lived with purpose. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, standing, his boxer briefs clinging to his hips, his back a map of muscle and shadow as he crossed to the kitchen. Emery watched him, her eyes tracing the lines of his shoulders, the way his hair caught the light, the effortless grace of his movements. She felt a pang, not of regret, but of wonder, that this man, this stranger who was no longer a stranger, had slipped so easily into her orbit. She followed him, the shirt swaying around her thighs, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. The kitchen was small, cluttered with coffee mugs and a vintage espresso machine that looked like it had stories of its own. Mason was already at work, grinding beans, the rich, earthy scent filling the air, his hands moving with a quiet confidence. Emery leaned against the counter, her hip cocked, her hair falling over one shoulder, the shirt slipping to reveal the curve of her shoulder, the edge of her collarbone. "You're serious about this coffee thing, huh?" she said, her voice teasing, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Dead serious," he replied, glancing over his shoulder, his eyes flicking over her, lingering on the way the shirt hugged her curves, the bare expanse of her legs. "Good coffee's an art form, like jazz, or whatever we did last night." Her laugh was soft, intimate, and she stepped closer, her arm brushing his as she peered at the espresso machine. "High praise," she said, her voice low, her lips curving into a smile that promised trouble. "Last night was pretty artistic." He turned, his body close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the faint scent of coffee and cedar wrapping around her. "Yeah?" he said, his voice a low rumble, his eyes searching hers, a mix of playfulness and something deeper, something that felt like hope. "You're not going to write a review, are you? I'm not sure I could handle the critique." She tilted her head, her hair spilling over her shoulder, her eyes glinting with mischief. "5 stars, she said, her voice soft but deliberate, her hand reaching out to brush his arm, her fingers lingering on the muscle, feeling the warmth of his skin. "But I might need a repeat performance to be sure." His grin was slow, almost predatory, but his eyes were warm, tender. "Deal," he said, his hand finding her waist, his fingers splaying across the curve, pulling her closer until their bodies were nearly touching, the counter at her back, the air between them, crackling. They stood there, the coffee forgotten, the world narrowing to the space where their breaths mingled, where their eyes locked in a silent conversation. The moment stretched, heavy with possibility, until the espresso machine hissed, breaking the spell. They laughed, the sound a shared release, and Mason turned back to the machine, pouring 2 cups of coffee, the steam curling into the air like a lover's sigh. He handed her a mug, their fingers brushing, the touch a spark that lingered. "Black, right?" he asked, his voice teasing, his eyes watching her closely. "Always," she said, taking a sip, her lips wrapping around the rim, her eyes never leaving his. The coffee was strong, bitter, perfect, and she hummed in approval, her throat working as she swallowed, the sound drawing his gaze to the line of her neck, the pulse point where he'd kissed her last night. They moved to the small dining table, sitting across from each other, the morning light streaming through the window, bathing them in a soft glow. The shirt slipped off one of Emery's shoulders, revealing the smooth curve of her skin, and Mason's eyes flicked there, then back to her face, his expression unreadable but warm. They ate toast simple, slightly burnt, smeared with butter, passing the plate back and forth, their fingers brushing, their smiles easy, unguarded. There was no awkwardness, no stilted small talk, just a quiet comfort that felt like they'd done this 100 times before, even though it was their first. But beneath the ease, questions simmered. Last night had been more than a moment, more than a spark. It had been a door opening, a glimpse of something neither had expected. Emery set her mug down, her fingers tracing the rim, her eyes dropping to the table, then lifting to meet his. "Mason," she said, her voice soft, hesitant. "What was last night? I mean, for you." He leaned back, his hands resting on his thighs, his eyes searching hers, his expression open, vulnerable. "I don't know," he said, his voice low, honest. "But it wasn't just nothing. It wasn't a one-off, not for me." He paused, his fingers flexing, as if reaching for the right words. "You felt it, right? That thing between us. It's not just the music or the wine or the night, it's you, us." Her breath caught, her chest tightening, her eyes shimmering with something she couldn't name. She nodded, her hair falling over her shoulder, her hand reaching across the table, her fingers brushing his. "I felt it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her lips curving into a small, trembling smile. "But I'm scared, Mason. I've done this before, jumped in, burned bright, crashed hard. I don't want that again." He took her hand, his grip firm but gentle, his thumb brushing her knuckles, his eyes steady, unwavering. "I'm scared too," he admitted, his voice rough with honesty. "After Claire, I thought I was done with this, with feeling like this. But last night, it wasn't a crash, it was a start, and I want to see where it goes, Emery, if you do." She looked at him, her heart pounding, her hand warm in his, the coffee bitter on her tongue, the morning light soft on his face. She saw the man who'd played jazz through the walls, who'd carried her box down the stairs, who'd kissed her like she was the only thing that mattered. And she wanted him not just for a night, but for the mornings after, for the music, for the stories they hadn't yet told. "I do," she said, her voice steady now, her eyes bright, her smile widening. "But no pressure, okay? Let's just see what happens, one song at a time." He grinned, that dimple flashing, his hand squeezing hers. "One song at a time," he agreed, his voice warm, his eyes sparkling with promise. "Starting with coffee, and maybe some better toast next time." She laughed, the sound bright and free, and leaned across the table, her lips brushing his in a soft, lingering kiss, tasting of coffee and hope. The morning stretched before them, a canvas of light and possibility, and in that moment they were Inotwu people who had found each other, not by accident, but by the quiet, persistent pull of something real. The Los Angeles week unfolded like a melody, each day a note in a song that hadn't yet found its final chord. Silver Lake buzzed with its usual rhythm, coffee shops spilling with poets, streets alive with murals and music, the air thick with the scent of eucalyptus and ambition. The atelier stood at the heart of it, its brick facade a quiet witness to the lives within, its ivy-clad walls whispering stories of beginnings and possibilities. Inside, the hallways carried the faint echo of footsteps, the hum of creativity, and the subtle pulse of something new taking root between two apartments, two souls, two hearts that had stumbled into each other's orbit. The week since Mason and Emery's night together had been a delicate dance moments, shared, boundaries tested, and a connection that grew stronger with each glance, each touch, each song. Mason Brooks, 31, leaned against the counter in his apartment, a cup of black coffee in hand, the steam curling into the morning light. At 6'1", he was a study in quiet intensity, his broad shoulders filling out a fitted gray t-shirt, the fabric clinging to the lean muscles of his chest and arms. His faded jeans hung low on his hips, hinting at the strength in his thighs, the subtle V of his abdomen that had driven Emery wild a week ago. His dark brown hair, tousled as always, fell into his hazel eyes, their green gold depths sparkling with a mix of contentment and restless curiosity, catching the sunlight that streamed through the window. The stubble on his jaw was a touch thicker today, framing the hard line of his cheekbones and that fleeting dimple that appeared when he grenaded a smile that could unravel defenses or spark a fire, depending on the moment. His hands, strong and calloused from years of gripping cameras, wrapped around the mug, the warmth seeping into his palms as he gazed out at the city, his thoughts drifting to the woman next door. The note she'd left under his door, ban autumn leaves, demne, dep day, was now pinned to his storyboard, a talisman of the spark that had changed everything. He hadn't defined what they were, not yet, but the way his heart thudded when he heard her footsteps in the hall told him it was more than a fleeting moment. Emery Reyes, 29, was in her apartment, her typewriter humming under her fingers, the keys, a rhythm that matched the pulse of her thoughts. Her space was a canvas of her soul books stacked in colorful chaos, fairy lights casting a constellation of glows, a half-finished manuscript spilling across her desk. At 5'6", she was a vision of grace and fire, her olive skin shimmering in the morning light, smooth and inviting, a canvas for the stories she wrote and the ones she lived. She wore a loose white blouse, its sleeves rolled up, the fabric slipping off one shoulder to reveal the delicate curve of her collarbone, and high-waisted denim shorts that hugged her hips and showcased her long, toned legs. Her raven black hair was swept into a messy bun, a few tendrils escaping to frame her face, brushing her high cheekbones. Her almond brown eyes, framed by lashes that seemed to carry secrets, were fixed on the page, but her mind was elsewhere on Mason, on the night they'd shared, on the morning since, when coffee and quiet glances had felt like a language of their own. Her lips, full and naturally rosy, curved into a half-smile as she paused. Her slender hands, nails painted a deep burgundy, hovering over the keys. Her neck, long and elegant, tilted slightly as she stretched, the blouse shifting to hint at the gentle swell of her chest, the skin still marked faintly by the memory of his touch. The week had been a series of moments, each one a brushstroke in a painting they were creating together. There were evenings when Emery slipped into Mason's apartment, her boots clicking on the hardwood, her laughter bright as they spun records jazz one night, indie the next, a rock ballad. When the mood turned heavy, they'd sit on his couch, wine glasses in hand, their knees brushing, their stories spilling like the candlelight that bathed the room. Mason spoke of his films, the frames he chased, the way a single shot could capture a lifetime of longing. Emery shared her writing, reading him passages from her novel, her voice a velvet caress that made his heart ache with recognition. They didn't rush to label what they were: lovers, friends, something more, but each touch, each glance, each shared silence felt like a promise, a vow to keep exploring. There were nights when Emery stayed, her body curled against his, her hair fanned across his chest, their breaths a shared rhythm in the dark. Other nights, she retreated to her own apartment, leaving a note under his door. Ban dem ne hoi buon, nungem vern lang ngay, a tease, a challenge, a reminder that she was still there, still listening. Mason kept each note, a growing collection that felt like a script for a story he wasn't ready to finish. He'd play a new song each night, choosing carefully, imagining her on the other side of the wall, her ear pressed to the plaster, her smile soft and secretive. The music was their bridge, their language, a way to say what words couldn't yet hold. This morning, Mason was alone, his apartment quiet, save for the distant hum of the city. He'd woken early, his body still humming with the memory of Emery's touch, her scent lingering on his sheets. They hadn't seen each other since the night before last, when they'd shared a bottle of wine and a slow dance in his living room, her body pressed against his, her lips brushing his jaw, their laughter soft in the candlelight. She'd left with a kiss, her eyes sparkling, her voice a whisper, "See you, Brooks. Don't play anything too sad without me." He'd watched her go, her hips swaying, her hair catching the light, and felt a pang not of loss, but of want, of possibility. Now, as he sipped his coffee, he crossed to the turntable, his fingers brushing the vinyls, searching for the right song. His eyes fell on Norah Jones' "Come Away With Me," and he smiled, that dimple flashing, his heart giving a quick, unsteady thud. It was perfect, soft, yearning, a question wrapped in a melody. He set the record on the turntable, the needle dropping with a soft crackle, the first notes spilling into the room like a lover's sigh. He opened his door, stepping into the hallway, his boots scuffing the floor, and glanced at Emery's apartment, 4C, its door closed, no sound escaping. He leaned against the wall, his coffee mug warm in his hands, and listened to the music, imagining her waking to it, her lips curving, her body stirring under the sheets. Emery, in her apartment, heard the song, its gentle strains seeping through the wall, a morning gift from the man next door. She paused her typing, her fingers hovering, her eyes closing as she let the music wrap around her. Nora's voice was a caress, a call, and Emery felt it in her bones, in the places where Mason's touch still lingered: her lips, her hips, the curve of her spine. She stood, her blouse slipping further off her shoulder, her bare feet silent on the hardwood, and crossed to the wall, pressing her palm against it, the plaster cool beneath her touch. On the other side, she knew, was Mason's hazel eyes, his quiet strength, his music that spoke to her in ways she hadn't expected. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with wonder, with the thrill of a story that was still being written. She tore a scrap of paper from her notebook, her handwriting a graceful scrawl, and penned a note. "Come away with me. You trying to tell me something, Brooks?" She slipped on her sandals, the leather soft against her feet, and stepped into the hallway, her hair bouncing with each step. The corridor was quiet, the morning light filtering through a window, casting her shadow long and soft. She knelt, her shorts riding up slightly, and slid the note under Mason's door, her breath catching as the paper disappeared. She didn't wait for a response. retreating to her apartment with a smile that felt like a secret, her pulse a quiet drumbeat in her ears. Mason heard the rustle, his lips twitching, and crossed to the door, picking up the note, his fingers tracing the words. His grin widened, that dimple deepening, and he tucked the note into his pocket, a new addition to his collection. He turned back to the turntable, the music still playing, Nora's voice a bridge between their apartments, their lives. He didn't know what came next, whether they'd fall into each other's arms, build something lasting, or drift apart like so many before. But he knew he wanted to find out, one song at a time, one note at a time. The day stretched before them, a canvas of light and possibility, and the city hummed outside, alive with the promise of stories yet to be told. Mason stepped back into his apartment, the door closing softly, and glanced at the wall that separated him from Emery. He didn't see her that morning, didn't hear her footsteps, but he felt her, in the music, in the notes they'd exchanged, in the quiet certainty that this wasn't the end. It was a pause, a breath, a moment to savor before the next verse. And what came next? That was a story for another night, another song, another note slipped under a door. The music played on, a melody of questions and dreams, and somewhere, in the space between their walls, Mason and Emery were writing the next chapter that would unfold in ways neither could predict, but both were eager to discover. Want to know where their story goes? Stay tuned to my channel for the next installment, where the music, the notes, and the heartbeats of Mason and Emery will reveal what lies beyond this open door. The atelier is waiting, and so are they.